All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Feldman, and as the Director of Water UCI, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural colloquium for our series, Speaking of Water, entitled Privatization of Water, Will It Bring Greater Social Equity? This is our first colloquium of 2022. This event marks a new and exciting milestone for Water UCI's colloquia. Through the efforts of a dedicated group of community leaders led by June Lopez, General Manager of Molten Miguel Water District, we've acquired generous support from organizations and individuals throughout the region. Their names are found on the flyer publicizing this event. I want to take this opportunity to thank these sponsors and our community leaders for their commitment to Water UCI's efforts to make possible what we hope will become an even more vital signature series on critical water issues facing California, our nation, and the world. Thanks also go to Water UCI Associate Director Shannon Roback, Doug Colby, Director of Advancement for the School of Social Ecology, and the School of Social Ecology itself for its support and hard work on behalf of this series. We've used a provocative phrase in today's colloquium title, Greater Social Equity. We do so with educational intent. Whether water is provided by a privately or publicly owned entity, demands for equity in regards to safety, access, reliability, and affordability often arise. Our colloquium intends to offer thoughtful, dispassionate, analytical discussion of these issues. I want to now introduce our 5 distinguished panelists, and again, thank you for taking time out of your busy days. Wade Crowfoot, Secretary of the California Natural Resources Agency, from whom you'll be hearing momentarily via pre-recorded video. Cindy Tuck, the Deputy Executive Director for Government Relations for the Association of California Water Agencies. Michael Hanneman, Professor of Economics and Wrigley Chair in Sustainability at the Arizona State University. Jennifer Capitolo, Executive Director at the California Water Association, and Laurel Firestone, Board Member of the California State Water Resources Control Board. With that, we will first begin with the short video featuring Secretary Wade Crowfoot.
Well, thanks very much for that introduction. Really exciting to be here with you virtually, although I hope to be with you in person in coming months. First of all, big thanks to Water UCI. The work that you're doing is informing management in Sacramento and across California, specifically on how science can inform water management. The discussion today should be a fascinating one, and it's all focused on how can water agencies help deliver social equity and whether public or private agencies are particularly well positioned to do that. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes giving you a broad context on that question and even open the aperture and talk a little bit even more broadly about California water. This is a fascinating time to be working on water around the world and certainly in the American West. We know that accelerating climate change is having impacts on hydrology across the planet. In a Mediterranean climate like California's, that's typically very dry, that gets its precipitation in one season, increasing winter temperatures and spring and summer temperatures are making our drought challenges, frankly, more challenging. And also the climate change is creating more intense precipitation when it does come through atmospheric rivers in the winter. So we talk about the dries getting drier, the wets getting wetter, and the hots getting hotter. So we have climate change as a challenge, but we also have social equity. You know, this reckoning that we have been engaged in as a society really for a long time, but most pronounced in the last couple of years, really is begging the question in water, which is why don't all Californians have equal access to clean and safe and affordable drinking water? And in fact, a lot of us consider it a crisis that upwards of 1 million Californians don't have access to water, safe, clean water out of their taps, like so many of us have come to take for granted. And in the past years, we in Sacramento, certainly working for Governor Newsom, the legislature, our agencies, community groups have all come together to recognize that we have to address this issue. We have to come together and ensure all Californians have clean and safe drinking water as a right. And so one of the questions that gets asked as we tackle that challenge is, what is the role of water agencies to deliver that water? And why aren't all water agencies able to deliver clean, safe, and affordable drinking water? Primarily we have challenges in isolated rural areas, but not just in isolated rural areas. Some urban areas, for example, of Los Angeles have faced these challenges. And so we've got a great panel here today to talk about the challenge of achieving social equity in water and a discussion around what type of water agency is best positioned to deliver this equity. I'll tell you that as state agencies right now, we are raising and spending hundreds of millions of dollars to support agencies to actually be able to provide this drinking water to Californians. Much of this work is not only about providing resources for engineering upgrades, capital investments, but also ensuring that actually the governance of water agencies works to provide that water for everyone. So in some cases, we're focused on consolidating very small systems, think like almost like a mom and pop water agency with larger adjacent agencies to be able to provide for the capital investment and the sophistication of water management needed to ensure clean and safe drinking water. Remarkable fact, in California, it's actually thousands of water agencies that provide drinking water to Californians. About 90% of our state's residents get their water from very large urban water agencies, but upwards of 10% get their water from thousands of very small water agencies, many of which were organized at a time before a lot of the challenges that we see today, whether it's declining aquifer levels or groundwater contamination. So this question around governance, water agencies, and equity is very much of a real-time dialogue here in Sacramento and across the state. And it's why I'm so glad that Water UCI is convening this discussion, and also why I'm so interested to hear the panel discussion that's coming up right now. Thanks once again for the opportunity to share some opening thoughts with you, and I look forward to our discussion today.
All right, thank you. With that, we're going to begin I will ask each of the panelists to spend a few minutes giving some introductory remarks. And Laurel Firestone with the California State Water Resources Control Board, why don't we begin with you?
Great, thank you. So as you said, I'm a member of the State Water Resources Control Board, and prior to being appointed by Governor Newsom, I've really spent my career working with communities to ensure they can access safe, clean, and affordable drinking water, both at the community level, primarily with small farm worker communities in the San Joaquin Valley, but also I've been doing a lot of work up here in Sacramento. I was part of a grassroots movement that helped California be the first in the nation to adopt the human right to water as a policy of the state, and really have been working ever since, and certainly in this role now, to try to make that a reality. And you heard from Secretary Crowfoot that we have more than 1 million Californians without reliable access to safe drinking water. And many of our most vulnerable Californians don't even have centralized water systems. They have to self-supply through their own domestic well or other source to meet their basic needs. For this panel, I really want to focus on the 98% or so of Californians that get their water from a community water system. And at the State Water Board, we regulate all community water systems under the Safe Drinking Water Act. So through the State Water Board, we maintain a list of systems that consistently fail to provide access to safe drinking water in the state, which we refer to this list as the Human Right to Water list. And there's currently 353 systems on that list, serving close to 900,000 people. Just under half of those have been on that list for over 3 years, some for over a decade. And the rest have begun to fail more recently. So to give you an idea, between just in the last year or so, 60 systems have come off that list, have been able to come back into compliance, but 105 systems have begun to fail and have gone onto that list. So even though we have 90% of the failing systems on track for developing solutions, we're really in a losing battle unless we are simultaneously addressing those systems that are also on the brink of failing. At the Water Board, we have an unprecedented amount of resources and political will to address this issue. And at the Water Board, we've created what we call our SAFER program. And that's really for the first time bringing a fully comprehensive and proactive approach to achieving the human right to water. So we're bringing billions at this point of funding for things like technical assistance for helping communities develop solutions, the planning and infrastructure construction costs. We are bringing all of our regulatory and enforcement tools, and we're developing a really data-driven assessment of the need around water quality, water accessibility, and affordability. Just to give you some takeaways of that needs assessment, which we update annually. As Secretary Crowfoot said, there are communities without safe drinking water from the tap in every region of the state. It is not just a rural issue, but it's primarily a small water system issue. So nearly all of those systems are, the vast majority of those systems are actually under 500 households. And all of them really are under 3,300 households that are on that list. And importantly, disproportionately, the households receiving drinking water that consistently fail to meet those standards are low-income, Indigenous, and communities of color. So given how much failing to supply safe drinking water is predominantly a small system issue, we've really focused our intervention and kind of proactive assistance strategies on trying to support building economies of scale and investing in long-term sustainability so folks aren't coming back on that list. And where feasible, we've been really pushing for consolidations of small systems, both physically interconnecting systems together to provide more reliability, but also consolidating the costs and revenue and management of the systems, even where physically connecting a pipe isn't feasible. So we are currently supporting 167 active consolidation projects throughout the state, and nearly all of those are for systems on the human right to water list. What we haven't focused on as much as a state and really as a community, I think, is really started to examine whether and how governance and institutional structures matter. How does the structure and governance of a water system either address or perpetuate the really entrenched disparities that we see around access to safe drinking water? And you know, how can we then intentionally address those disparities and constraints within development of solutions, and especially with consolidations that are merging one system into another, where there is some form of government change or governance change. What I would love to, I'm really excited to talk about this at the panel today. Before I let go of my time, and I know I've gone long, I did want to give just a quick overview of just private and public water systems landscape in California as we go into this discussion. So I'm going to focus on, when we talk about community drinking water systems, we're really talking about groups that are publicly owned or governmental entities that are providing directly providing water to customers, versus or the other group would be privately owned, so non-governmental institutions that are providing water. And when we think about that, we really have to unmask that a bit. There are close to 3,000 community water systems in the state, and there are many, many different types of legal structures and authorities. And a recent publication by Dobbin and Fensel grouped those into about 26 distinct types of systems that each have their own kind of legal structure and authorities. So there's huge diversity. Just to give you some sense of what those look like, when we talk about governmental entities, most of them are actually cities, as well as then special districts like community services districts or county water districts, which many of which are members of ACWA that I know Cindy will be representing. And then water systems that are privately owned and are both large and small, investor-owned utilities that Jennifer will talk about more, and really, but importantly, I think what gets lost is that actually the most common private water systems are actually mutual water companies that are owned by local property owners. There's also just a handful of kind of other private entities that aren't publicly, investor-owned utilities. And then on the government side, there are systems where the state and federal government operates water systems directly, like some of our prison systems. So just last 2 points, some takeaways on this is when you account for system size and you factor that in, if we look broadly at all, we're seeing that public and private systems don't actually perform significantly differently in terms of violations of the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, there are big differences when you start to look at size. So for example, investor-owned utilities are very influenced by size in terms of their performance. And so small investor-owned utilities statistically are much more likely to have violations than other types of small systems. But large investor-owned utilities are more likely to perform better than large public systems. Of course, that's statistics. Each one is different. But that's different than, for example, cities tend to perform pretty similar no matter what their size. And I guess another thing just to highlight is, I think there's an idea that there's that there's a significant trend towards privatization, and that we really don't see that happening overall in California when we look at the full landscape. There is a pattern of private systems being consolidated more than public systems, and investor-owned utilities are often what is consolidating with those, so private systems consolidating with private systems. But there's also a huge amount of private systems like mobile home parks that are consolidating into public entities like cities. So just to give you a sense, it is nuanced. There's so many different complexities within water governance, just within the landscape of systems that provide safe drinking water to households.
Thank you very much, Laurel. Very illuminating. We're going to go right now to Jennifer Capitolo with California Water Association for some introductory remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And I just want to echo, my thanks for putting together this panel. I spend a lot of time talking about water equity, and this is really kind of a new, fresh approach that we're presented with here today. So I hope it's enlightening for all of you as well. Just a little background on California Water Association. I represent 95 regulated public water utilities, as Laurel said, also known as private water companies or investor-owned water utilities. You might hear us today use the term IOU. We serve about 1.5 million connections, which is about 6 million people here in California. And we really are concentrated into 9 large Class A companies that serve more than 10,000 connections. Our members really range from, again, large publicly traded corporations to small family-owned businesses. A lot of times I'm asked, why is one area served by a municipal and another area served by an IOU? And it's really a story about the development of California and how and when cities incorporated. There are areas where a city popped up and a suburb popped up and that suburb wasn't incorporated, and who's going to serve, who's going to provide drinking water service there, and the city didn't want to take on something that was outside of their city limits. And so this investor-owned utility then evolved. So it's really, again, kind of the history of California is how you can look at who serves where. We are regulated, investor-owned utilities are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. They regulate both rates and terms of service. The shared regulation happens between the Public Utilities Commission and the State Water Resources Control Board with regards to water quality. California Water Association, we're a statewide association. We represent our members in front of the Water Board, Department of Water Resources, Public Utilities Commission, the legislature, the governor. We have 11 committees in our association. I don't want to list all of them for you. You can probably guess what a lot of them are. But I do want to mention that we do have 2 committees that I really think address water equity. We have a committee that's focused on the needs of small companies. And so we meet on a monthly basis to talk through the challenges facing small companies. We bring in our Class A member companies to provide resources for them. We bring in grant writers and we bring in experts to provide assistance to them. Then we also have a committee that we've just more formalized. We've had it in a less formal role for years, but we've really formalized now a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And that committee is tasked with looking at DEI, not just from a company perspective, so, more our workforce and how we operate, but also we incorporate a discussion about service and our customers and how are we making sure that we're providing culturally competent service to our customers. CWA also is a forum for sharing best practices, monthly meetings, conferences, workshops, all those kinds of things. I do want to mention the term private, which is used in the title of this panel, and I'm sure we'll continue talking about it today. But I want to address that so there's no confusion, because we as California Water Association, we find that term misleading, and we try not to use the term private to describe ourselves. We use California Public Utilities Commission regulated water utility. It's a very long statement to say. I've shortened it to regulated water utility for our discussion today. But regulated water utilities are among the most regulated businesses in America. And it really is a partnership between the public and the private sector. All utilities, public and private, are subject to the same environmental regulations, the same water quality regulations. Our operators are licensed by the same state agencies. We all do the same inspections, the same reports. I mean, really what we're doing is very similar. The only area where we tend to differ is our economic regulation. So a municipal water district has an elected board of directors or a city council that sets its rates and determines its infrastructure investments. For investor-owned utilities, we have the California Public Utilities Commission. State government control instead of local government control. But I just want to make sure that it's really clear that it's the government that is setting the rates for investor-owned utilities. It is not the investor-owned utility. And that is really important so that you further understand why that term private is misleading. So I'm going to stop talking now so we can get back into the panel session, but thank you again.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very illuminating. Now I'd like to turn to Cindy Tuck, who is with the Association of California Water Agencies.
Thank you, Director Feldman, and thanks to UC Irvine. It's great to be part of this panel today. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Government Relations at ACWA. That's the short name for the Association of California Water Agencies. And prior to joining ACWA, I served as the Undersecretary at the California Environmental Protection Agency, which was a fantastic experience. And hopefully having that state background helps ACWA, and a lot of our team have worked for the state. So we try to partner with the state a lot on good policy. So at ACWA, we represent 467 public water agencies across the state. Some of them are large, some of them medium, some of them we would call small, but they're not as small as some of the ones that Laurel talked about that are having the real crisis relative to safe drinking water. These public water agencies, they are local governments. I always like to emphasize that. They are not-for-profit entities. And as Laurel mentioned, they are special districts and cities. You may have noticed if you looked at the sponsors, there's 3 water districts on there. There's Irvine Ranch Water District, Mesa Water District, Moulton Miguel Water District, and all 3 of those are public water agencies. They're special districts. Our members include agencies, public agencies that provide water service, of course, to the public, but we also have agricultural agencies and such as irrigation districts and groundwater sustainability agencies. But together, our membership distributes 90% of the water that's distributed in California. So we call ourselves the big tent in ACWA. Or in California for water. But we work, I love working with Jennifer Capitolo. We coordinate, we like to work with all kinds of organizations that care about water. And one thing I'll say about water is, different people have different opinions on all kinds of water issues, but there's really great people working on water. So it's great when we come together, listen, and we don't always agree, but when we come together, it's fantastic. So I think a couple notes about public water agencies is, and Laurel mentioned this, that we have special district members, we have city members, and their rate decisions, these are made in public meetings. We have elected officials, if it's city councils, the boards of these water districts are elected officials. Another thing that's unique to the public water agencies is that they are required to abide by a specific part of the state constitution. And that's commonly called Prop 218. That's because it was passed through, Proposition 218 and added to state law. But not without going into detail on Prop 218, you could have a whole colloquium about that. The focus is that the rates are tied to the actual cost of service at the agencies. I want to do a plug for public water agencies. Of course, they do a fantastic job in providing safe drinking water. And Laurel mentioned, and Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, there are these failing systems. They tend to be the smaller ones. And the list that Laurel referenced, the Human Right to Water list, I think is a very important list. And I appreciated getting the latest update on that today from Laurel. ACWA is a very active participant in the State Water Board's stakeholder process for how the State Water Board implements the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund that came out of Senator Manning's legislation. This is a fantastic program, and we're involved. We want this program to be successful, and I know Laurel is a key leader in this work and has staff who are so dedicated, and it's really quite an effort. At ACWA, this is a policy priority for our board of directors. We have a board level task force that meets and works on these issues, but we also have 2 working groups that really get into the weeds. One of them works on SB 200 implementation. That's the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. And then there's another group that's worked on COVID funding, but they also meet and we work on the low income rate assistance issues and have really good discussions on that. Just an example of things that we've done in this area. This past year, we worked with Senator Gonzalez and her staff and 3 environmental justice organizations around SB 403, which was her bill relating to consolidations. And the bill proposed to give the State Water Board expanded authority for mandating consolidations, this time focused on at-risk systems and at-risk wells. And these are the ones that Laurel referred to as they're not failing, but they're on the brink of failing. So this was an authority to address that situation with the tool of consolidation. And, this was an example where over a set of meetings, we rolled up our sleeves, worked through the issues, listened to each other, and got to an agreement. And now that bill is state law. So it's just an example of, collaboration is so important on getting to solutions. So I think that's a positive note to end on. Collaboration is a good thing. And I really appreciate the invitation from UC Irvine to be here today.
Thank you, Cindy, and appreciate your introductory remarks very much. Last but not least, I want to turn to Professor Michael Hanneman with Arizona State University. Welcome, Michael. And you're muted. There you go.
It's good to see you, David, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel. This is my 50th year of studying the economics of water and wastewater. And I just want to say I have tremendous respect for everybody in the industry, on the municipal side and on the investor-owned. The finances of providing water are very challenging, and in my experience, they've gotten more so in the last decades than earlier. There is no cheap water anywhere, and water is dominated by economies of scale. And that really tilts the balance against small systems everywhere. The challenge of water is raising the money needed to install infrastructure and to maintain infrastructure and replace it as it ages, which is happening all around the state. And this financing challenge is really daunting. There's an aspect which isn't recognized yet. In addition to underserved populations, and those are important, I've spent 19 years working with the Hopley Reservation in Arizona on their water right, and I'm working with colonias in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, so I'm familiar with this. But in addition to that, the kind of mainstream, if you like, middle-class water systems are about to face a huge financial crisis over the next decade. And that's because California has been very successful in promoting conservation and reducing per capita use. And there's also now a wave of innovation bringing recycled wastewater for indirect or direct potable. And then that gives, in the long run, resilience to our water supply. In the short run, it's going to upend finances of wholesale and retail water systems. If you reduce water use, the expenses don't go down barely at all because most of water is a fixed cost. And we're going to find over the next decade, huge financial strains for the existing water systems, as well as the financial challenges of underserved populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Very much appreciated your comments. Now we will turn to some Q&A, and I want to make mention of the fact that we're going to be kind of choosy on the questions in the interest of time, in the interest of respect also for our audience. And to our audience, please note that we have on the bottom of your Zoom screen an option to insert questions, and we will try to go through as many of those as time permits. I want to begin with a general question for all of the participants. the state of California is moving past discussions on how to meet the needs of Californians who don't have access to safe and affordable drinking water, been alluded to by a number of our panelists, and is now working on real solutions with the help of state funding. What makes communities more confident about a solution or solutions? And what makes communities more confident regarding their providers? Who would like to begin? Any of you? Go ahead, Cindy.
So I'll focus on the confidence in the provider part, and of course, focus from a public agency perspective. Two things come right to mind. The first is good service. Most people, I have here my glass from the city of Sacramento tap water. You go turn on the tap, you get your glass of water. You don't even think about where it comes from. Is it safe or not? You know it's safe, you drink it. That's what most customers experience, but not the ones with failing systems. But good service is what really can instill confidence in customers, of course, in the public. Another thing, of course, is good communication with the customers and the community. So, for example, if maybe aging infrastructure, maybe a particular type of pipe or whatever is an issue for a water agency and they need to raise rates to upgrade or replace that infrastructure, they need to, and our members do this all the time, communicate with their customers about what is the problem they're trying to solve, what will happen if they don't address it, and what are the costs and why. Make that very transparent to them. And then, of course, the decisions are made in a public meeting. So those are two factors. It's good service and good communication.
Very good. Thank you. Jennifer?
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in too. To piggyback on what Cindy was saying, I really feel like community confidence really is public trust. That's really what we're talking about. And the water coming out of the tap, it needs to be clean, it needs to be safe. That's really it. Unfortunately, for water utilities, for very long, we've been called the silent service. And because that's really because our infrastructure is hidden underground. Most folks don't have to think twice about the infrastructure that brings safe drinking water to their home. The truth is that our water systems are aging, and stories of communities with neglected infrastructure and compromised drinking water, that's a very real communication that's going on right now. Here in California, drought, wildfire, it threatens our drinking water sources, something we very much need to be aware of. So I think really in this area of public trust is what we need to do is do a much better job of proving to our customers that these investments are needed, communicating with our customers, really going back to basic marketing and communications about the value of these investments, about all the behind the scenes work that it takes to get that safe drinking water coming out of the tap. We do want them not thinking twice about flushing or turning on their faucet or taking a drink of water, but there is a lot of work that goes into that. And part of that, again, is, it's really about investing in our systems, making sure that folks understand that water infrastructure supports every facet of our daily lives. And while we're doing all this, again, bringing it back to the conversation about equity, we have to strive for equity. We need to make sure that quality, safety, reliability, affordability, all of those should not depend on what your income is, and it shouldn't depend on where you live. And we need to engage those customers that are underserved in this process. Again, it's really kind of that nuts and bolts communication, making water systems, those necessary investments, maintaining water systems. I feel like that's something that our members do really well. Communicating the value of those investments, that's something that we can do better. And it isn't just an issue for members of my association. I think it's an issue for all water agencies, that we need to make sure that that we're communicating that value to our customers. Because when we invest in systems, we're not just benefiting the water provider, we're benefiting the customers, we're benefiting our workforce, our trades contractors, our planning and engineering firms. There's really a lot more that can drive that economic recovery that we're hoping for right now from COVID as well through investment. So I just want to say I'm optimistic about our collective commitments to the industry and really striving to reach these investment goals.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Laurel, Michael, any comments?
Could I make one? So what Laurel has described, the initiatives being adopted by the state board and by the legislature is truly amazing and excellent. There is, however, a gap. The state does a rotten job of collecting financial and economic data on the water industry overall. So we collect health data, drinking water violations, other things. There is no database, no usable database to analyze fiscal stress on, and this is for municipal as well as IOUs. And the state board doesn't have a large economic staff and historically has been about law and water rights and health, but not economics. And let me say, I served as the state board's economic staff for 4 or 5 years while a professor at Berkeley from 1986 to 1990. And the staff that they have work very hard, but it's really the financial data. And with this huge fragmentation, 3,000 water systems, you can't pull together the data. There's no reason why if you report safe drinking water to the EPA or you report to the state board, you couldn't be asked to report also some basic financial information. And from this aspect of dealing with the financing problem, it really would help if we had a more comprehensive picture.
Thank you
Well,
very much.
I kind of want to build on that. I think Cindy and Jennifer, I don't have anything to add to your great answers to public confidence, but I do want to build on the data question around affordability. For under our authorities with at the State Water Board under the Safe Drinking Water Act, we're really focused on water safety and supply. And really our authorities are very clear around water quality and maximum contaminant levels. We're starting to have to be more explicit and focused on waterworks supply information because we're needing to adjust to this new hydrology that we have. There's new expectations around resiliency measures, but we don't regulate or examine financial information or rates of water systems in terms of our regulatory authority. And so in that way, the investor-owned utilities that are regulated by the CPUC, that is where there's great data, very comprehensive data and analysis on finances and rates. And there's really not anything like that on the on all of the, 80% or so of other agencies that aren't regulated under the CPUC. We are, though, starting to change on the data collection. So even though we aren't regulators on this, we are recognizing, for example, with COVID, that huge numbers of people were unable to pay their water bills. And we did a survey to understand the debt that customers were incurring because they were unable to pay their water bills. And we're ultimately able to provide assistance and debt relief for those customers through water systems throughout the state. And so that is one way we've gotten really the first of its kind data on, but is specific to the COVID period and shutoffs. The other place that we're doing this is we do an annual electronic annual report that every single water system has to report annually. In addition to their water quality information and monitoring that comes into us, they have to report a whole host of other things. And we have a new section on water rates, and that has a certain amount of financial information, but it is really early. We haven't gotten a complete picture. Frankly, there hasn't been great responses to filling that out. So we have a long way to go.
I want to thank all of the panelists for these excellent answers to this question. I'm going to exercise the moderator's privilege here. I recognize that there are a number of really excellent questions in the Q&A from our audience. And with your consent, I am going to go ahead and dive into some of these questions, and I'm going to direct them at all of the panelists.
Director Feldman, could I just make one 30-second
Go ahead, Cindy.
comment?
Go right ahead.
Just one 30-second comment. Public water agencies do submit financial information to the state. And one of the issues that came up in conversations with the State Water Board was sometimes there's a difficulty between state agencies in accessing each other's information in an efficient, easy way. And that's something that could be worked on. But that's not the only IT problem in the state. There's certainly other IT problems.
Yeah, but there are gaps in the data. So let me give you an example. A statistic would be how many miles of pipe are replaced over the last 5 years, report every 5 years, because that's a measure of investment in maintenance. You don't get that, as far as I know, from any source. And that would be very useful to get a sense of the state's overall financial, the backlog of investment in different parts of the state. So we could, there's more, I know I've used the data but there are additional things. Another is the difference between a household rate, a water rate and a household bill. And comparing different systems, you need to have some sense of the distribution, the size of the bills, not what they charge for 12 CCF a month. And I don't think we're collecting that.
Yeah, thank you. Good illuminating and amplifying comments. There is a question in the audience Q&A, and I'll simply go ahead and read it. It seems apparent to one of our audience members that small underperforming systems need financial and technical help. And the elephant in the room is who should fund these efforts? What are each of your thoughts? As it was said, I believe by you, Michael, there is no cheap water remaining.
Well, we are funding those efforts. So we have taken on that responsibility as the state, and we're making those investments. And it's not as quick and easy as everyone would like, but in terms of responsibility, I think the state is really stepping up to that.
Let me say, I think there are a couple more pieces. So if you distinguish you can break down the cost of running a water system into back office costs and the costs associated with the network and replacing pipes and whatever. I think there is a chance for economies of scale in centralizing back office costs and coordinating those. That's one. Every system wants local autonomy but I think there's significant amount of money. It's not the only. The other thing is, it's wonderful that the state is raising this money, but the potential capital that needs to be raised is humongous. And that could be a reason for the private sector. I mean, and privatization as a matter of ideology means nothing to me. The UK privatized water for two reasons. One was Mrs. Thatcher's ideology. The other was the UK government couldn't raise the funds, couldn't set aside the funds for infrastructure investments that the UK water industry needed. And some form of private or private-public may need to play a role in raising the large amounts of funding that we need in California over the coming decade or two.
And I'll just add, there's been huge, since the 70s, there's been a huge drop in governmental investment in infrastructure. And with the passage just of this past year and this more recent, both state and federal infrastructure investments, my hope is that's certainly different this year. And my hope is that that will continue to change. And that is vital for not just ensuring that we're able to provide safe water, but also for keeping water a little bit more affordable. It's not going to, solve the increasing pressures on water rates to go up, but it does address one key driver of that. And we do have a responsibility to do that, I think, as a state. It shouldn't only be on ratepayers, I guess, is my point.
Before we move on to another question, Jennifer, did you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I'll just add that I started working with California Water Association in 2011, and at that time we had 123 water utilities. We now have 94, and I think Laurel hinted at this, you know, we're cannibals, we eat ourselves. We take over systems that are failing and not working. But beyond that, just in the last 10 years, we've done over 20 small system consolidations. And those have not been easy. And I think that's really the caution of like this whole, you know, conversation about privatization is, are we trying to gobble up all these small failing systems? No, we're absolutely not trying to do that. Are there situations where it makes sense? Yes, geography is a huge factor in that. If it's something that's right next to our system, will we try to do it? Well, every situation is different. So we've been having to evaluate those. It's quite a lengthy process though. There is a process on the front end of just negotiating what that's going to look like. It's really getting in there and figuring out all the problems with that system. And again, since everything's underground, a lot of times you don't know what you're getting into when you take over a small failing system. But then added on top of that, we have to go through the California Public Utilities Commission process. And that's taking over 1.5 years to get that final approval for these small system consolidations. So if you have someone sitting and waiting without access to safe drinking water, and we add another 1.5 years on top of it, it's just, sometimes it doesn't make sense for us to be the one that consolidates these small systems. I think we are available, we can bring capital, we can be more creative in how we structure the rates. We can do rate consolidation because we don't have Proposition 218 limitations like our public agency counterparts. But again, it really is on a case-by-case basis of whether we can be part of the solution for that system or not.
Yeah, great answers, all of you. And in fact,
I'd like to add one thing.
Go ahead.
Real quickly.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Two quick things. One, Aqua, and I think we all are very appreciative of Governor Newsom making the safe drinking water issue a priority, and the legislature as well. And so, you know, kudos to them. One other note is that when COVID started, 2020, 2021, I think for the first time that I'm aware of, you had the water community and the environmental justice community hand in hand, and environmental organizations as well, not just environmental justice organizations, hand in hand advocating for federal funding together for water. And we obtained that funding, and then that's been, part of that went to California, and Water Board and other agencies are distributing that funding. But that just shows, again, when we partner, we can do great things, but we need more financial assistance from Washington.
Okay. Some of your comments, all of you panelists, actually are a very good segue to a set of other questions that are also in the Q&A. There's a couple of questions related to this issue of consolidation. And so let me try to pose this question to all four of you, answer as you will. It's difficult to imagine, one audience member says, a private water company of similar scale being less expensive than a public one, given property taxes, then the need for a profit. Why not consolidate small systems into larger public systems that are well capitalized and have core competence? Perhaps the state could reimburse that. And related to that is, would such a consolidation help underserved communities? Who'd like to comment?
I mean, I'll say something. I know we just have a few more minutes that just goes to a topic that I know we're not able to spend quite as much time on, but related to that is that, when we're thinking about equity, we've talked mostly about equity for everyone to have access to safe water. But when we think about equity, it's really can an individual access water and afford to do that? That's safe and reliable. And that really comes down to customer affordability in many ways, in addition to the viability of a water system. And I will say that even if water costs and the overall water rates are higher in one system versus another. It may be that that the system that has higher rates is able to offer a more equitable rate structure to its customers. So in the case of investor-owned utilities, they are actually mandated to issue a customer assistance, low-income assistance customer assistance program. And that helps ensure that it's not regressive, that you're meeting customers where they are at. We still need to improve that, but we don't have anything like that on the public side. In fact, we have a barrier to that with Prop 218. And so that's really a key reason and gap in ensuring we're living up to the human right to water is really establishing low-income affordability and customer assistance programs statewide to ensure everyone can afford access to water.
Cindy, Jennifer, Michael?
No, what Laura said is exactly right. Since with Prop 218, public systems can't do that. I want to mention something else. 50 years ago, until about 1960, most water systems relied heavily on property taxes. And we switched because economists said, no, you should have volumetric user charges. And I understand that. Property taxes, however, had a way of spreading costs equitably. If I had a highly valued home and you had a low valued one, I'd get a higher property tax. We might both use the same amount of water from the same water system. But a byproduct of property taxes was a degree of equity in funding. And all I'm saying is, and also stability, so that if you suddenly have conservation and revenues drop, you have a more stable source. And I'm not advocating property taxes, and we had Prop 13, and which, but I'm pointing out that somehow decoupling the sort of level of water use and from how we pay, that was accomplished quite neatly with property taxes. That's all.
One note to add is Laurel was talking about we need a statewide low-income water rate assistance program, and Aqua agrees with that. Two caveats: we think it needs to be well designed. There's obviously, the detail is important to get worked out, but that's possible. And Senator Dodds developed a bill last year, introduced it, and we worked out language with him last year. That bill is pending. And of course, the other thing is it needs a good, appropriate funding source. And again, federal money on that issue would be great. It's not just California that has this issue, other states do as well.
I'll just
Go
add
ahead,
one
Jennifer. Go ahead.
closing remark on the low-income rate assistance program that Cindy was talking about. We do have those programs, and we have been operating them for some time, and they're not perfect. I think that is a takeaway for you all today on this issue, is that we have areas of California that are served by a water utility that are mostly low income. So if you have a community with mostly low income, then you don't have high income people there to help with the subsidization. You end up having low income people subsidizing very low income people. So the importance of a statewide low income rate assistance program, that's absolutely what we need, and it's appropriate for us to look towards that model. There are also a couple other things that we need to think about when we're thinking about a statewide low-income rate assistance program, and those are, solid eligibility verification, because it's really hard for a water utility to have to be the one that verify if someone is low income or eligible or not eligible. But also we need to have a universal application. If we had a single application for multiple, social service type programs, that really better serves the needs of low-income people than them having to go to here and get verified and there and get verified in another, verification process. So looking more towards, universal eligibility will also help achieve this goal of equity.
Very good. Thank you. We could clearly go on for another hour. We do want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially the panelists. This has been great. In closing, I want to mention just a couple of things. We are hoping that future colloquia will be able to be held on a hybrid model. We'll continue to use Zoom, but hopefully we'll be able to have in-person events at the University of California, Irvine. Stay tuned. We're hoping to have the first of such events in March. We'll send out publicity on that. I cannot thank the panelists enough for your time this afternoon in illuminating and informing us in a dispassionate, analytical manner the importance of equity in discussing issues of privatization. This is such an important issue. I would be amazed and disappointed, frankly, if we didn't have another panel at some future point on issues related to what we discussed today. So anyway, that's my pitch as director of Water UCI. And I want to thank, again, all of the audience. We had a tremendous number of people, nearly 300, who were able to attend. And we think you're going to get great value out of this. And to prove it, this will be recorded, and it will, or has been recorded, and will be on our Water UCI homepage. So be looking for that. With that, my thanks to all of you. And again, I promise we will revisit this topic in the future.